I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. It's September 23rd, and we have a lot to talk about. And before we dive into this week's episode, I want to take just a minute to share that today is the 8th birthday of RealTalk MS. I know I end up saying something like this every year, but it is hard for me to believe that the podcast I launched in 2017 with the goal of reaching maybe 300 listeners today reaches thousands of people living with MS, their care partners, MS researchers, and clinicians in more than 100 countries. I'm grateful that every one of you chooses to spend a small part of your day listening to this podcast. And I'm even more grateful that so many of you share your thoughts and ideas about the podcast with me. I always tell people that you guys give me my report card every week, and I want you to know how much I appreciate that feedback. So we'll keep this conversation going until we no longer have to, when we can look at MS in the rearview mirror and talk about it in the past tense. Today, we're in Barcelona, Spain, because tomorrow kicks off the largest MS research conference in the world. It's the annual scientific congress of the European Committee for Treatment and Research in Multiple Sclerosis, better known by its acronym, ECTRIMS. This year at ECTRIMS, there's a lot of interest in the updated McDonald diagnostic criteria. This is the worldwide gold standard for diagnosing MS, and although the latest update to the McDonald criteria was announced last year at this conference, that update has just been published. So now the mission is to ensure that neurologists everywhere are up to speed on what's in this update. And if you'd like to be up to speed on the updated McDonald criteria, I'll invite you to check out episode 416 of this podcast, where you'll hear my conversation with Dr. Andrew Solomon about the changes in the McDonald criteria. And you'll find a link to that episode in today's show notes. Between 9,000 and 10,000 MS researchers and clinicians are here in Barcelona for ECTRIMS, and many of them are anxiously waiting to see whether the FDA is going to approve tolebrutinib, the first in a new category of disease-modifying therapies to be up for approval. And that approval is expected at the end of this week. Needless to say, you'll hear all the details surrounding the FDA's decision in next week's episode of the podcast. Dr. Robert Fox, the principal investigator in the Phase 3 clinical trial for tolebrutinib and non-relapsing secondary progressive MS, presented the positive results from that trial last year at ECTRIMS, and if you missed my conversation with Dr. Fox, you can catch it on YouTube, and you'll find that link in today's show notes. ECTRIMS is 3 days of frantically trying to get to as many of the presentations as possible. And there are always multiple presentations that take place simultaneously. So figuring out my schedule at ECTRIMS sometimes feels like I'm developing a major battle plan. And when you add in scheduling interviews with many of the conference presenters, this becomes my busiest week of the year. And I wouldn't have it any other way. Some of the presentations at ECTRIMS are going to focus on preserving brain health. MS can affect memory, attention, and processing speed. But there's a lot you can do to preserve and even improve your brain health. Nurse practitioner Erin Wilkinson joins me this week to discuss strategies you can adopt to help preserve cognitive function and quality of life. Erin is a nurse practitioner in the Multiple Sclerosis Department of the Cleveland Clinic Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health. She's pursuing her Doctor of Nursing Practice degree at the University of Alabama, and Erin conducts her own research on brain health and MS. But before we get to my conversation with nurse practitioner Erin Wilkinson, there are a few other things that you should know about. One of the best parts of my job is that it allows me to meet remarkable people. Jan Bonville was diagnosed with MS 20 years ago. She's a San Francisco-based consultant, speaker, writer, and advocate for inclusive travel and patient empowerment. I had an opportunity to talk with Jan about resilience, empowerment, and self-advocacy. These are things that Chan lives every day. In a moment, you'll hear my conversation with Chan Bonville. Chan Bonville is a San Francisco-based consultant, speaker, writer, and advocate for inclusive travel and patient empowerment. While living with MS and progressive mobility disability for over 20 years, Chan has built a successful career, raised a family, and traveled globally, often going to nature and wilderness destinations that are considered inaccessible to wheelchair users. Chan also serves on the Board of Trustees for the National MS Society and is a member of the San Francisco Mayor's Council for Disability and Health. Welcome to the podcast, Chan.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Let's start at the beginning. Tell me, when were you diagnosed with MS?
I was diagnosed when I was in my mid-20s. So that was, I'm going to say, over 20 years ago. I was in the middle of, I had just started or relatively recently started what I thought was a promising career and was thinking of starting a family. So I was really kind of in the middle of everything, like most people, unsure of what I wanted to do with my life and who I wanted to be. And it was shocking and scary, but that's when it happened.
And like a lot of people, you were in the middle of life when you were diagnosed. So how did you process that diagnosis and what helped you move forward?
I knew something was wrong. I think like many people, I was probably diagnosed a bit late. I'd been, fairly active and was experiencing fatigue and foot drop for a long time before I was diagnosed and realized what it was. So in a way, it was a relief to have a diagnosis, but of course the diagnosis itself was and at that time, it was even scarier than it is now, I believe. Because my symptoms were, and they still are, mobility related, it wasn't something that I could ignore even if I wanted to. I didn't have some of those symptoms that come and go. It really was kind of a progressive decline in mobility. How I processed it is, I was very honest about it, actually, to my close friends and to my family. I know not everyone is, but for me, it was a part of who I was. It was becoming a part of my new identity. And I feel that if people don't accept it, that's their problem, not yours. So support from my husband and friends was very helpful. Not everyone was supportive, but that was very helpful in those days and helped me move forward and figure out what to do.
What do you think you've learned about yourself as you've navigated life with MS?
So for myself, I would say that I'm fairly tough, I'm resilient, and I'm able to deal with adversity, pain, and not getting what I want. What I've also learned is that it's important to advocate. I am not someone who is a natural advocate. I certainly wouldn't consider myself kind of a natural born advocate. But I realized fairly early on that by not doing that and by keeping quiet and being quote unquote a good girl and not speaking up, I wasn't helping anybody. I wasn't helping myself. I wasn't helping other people. I certainly wasn't helping other people with MS or disabilities. So what I learned about myself is the importance to speak up, the importance to be honest and ask for help, the importance to fight when you have to, because it is challenging to live with MS and live with disability, and our society is not set up. Our society is very ableist and it's not set up for people to deal well, at least with people with disabilities. This is not anybody's fault, so I'm not blaming anybody, but it is a combination of history and attitudes and something that we, as people with chronic illnesses like MS, need to address head on. And that's something which I've learned is the importance of maybe doing things which you might be uncomfortable with. So
I heard you describe yourself as pretty tough. When it comes to living with MS, people often use words like empowerment and resilience. What do those words mean to you?
Resilience means don't give up. It doesn't mean being physically strong, which I'm not, by the way. It means keep going, no matter what obstacle comes in your way. Get up when you fall down, literally, since that happens to me literally. And empowerment means believe in yourself and ask for what you want. The problem with MS, unlike a terminal illness, at least this is my perspective. Others, but I'm curious on others' opinions, but you may feel that go through the different stages of challenges with illness on the same day. You may feel denial, anger, and acceptance on the same day and start the same cycle all over again. I don't think that's a bad thing. It's a good thing to feel anger and to refuse to give in, because it's what keeps you fighting and keeps you trying to move. So that's part of resilience to me too, is you have a bad day, you have an encounter with someone who's very ableist. You have an encounter where you're not able to, physically get into a space. But keep going, keep trying, ask for help to get into that space. Call that person out on their behavior if you can. Ask for help. Or if none of those things come to you in the moment, because I understand the feeling of not wanting to speak up in a certain environment, then, give yourself permission to grieve and to be sad and to share that with other people when you get back.
I could not agree with you more. I think learning to advocate on your own behalf is just super important when you're living with a disability. How did you learn to ask for help?
Yeah, it's a good question, because as I said, I'm not a natural born advocate. And I actually initially wanted to, frankly, keep my head down and just blend like everybody else. And as I said, I wasn't helping anybody by doing that. I certainly wasn't helping myself. I wasn't helping other people. So I learned out of necessity, I would say, realizing that if I didn't advocate and ask for help, I was going to end up in constantly, frankly, being treated like a second-class citizen. I needed to ask for accommodations. I needed to ask for help to do the things that I needed to do to get about my daily life. So I learned this through necessity and through, frankly, bad experience, and realizing the power of asking for help asking for help actually is something which makes you stronger, not weaker.
Can you explain what the social and medical models of disability are and how they each impact people who are living with MS?
Yeah. Well, I'll give you my perspective, John, because obviously there's medical experts out there who have studied this, to death, and I don't need to repeat that. But in my perspective, the medical model of disability sees disability as it's also sometimes called a deficit model of disability. So disability is seen as a bad thing, and the burden is on the disabled person to basically deal with life socially, professionally, physically. The person with the disability needs to, basically figure out how to deal with a physical environment that's not accessible, a social environment that's not friendly. In the social model, the social model doesn't deny the existence of disability, but it doesn't put sort of a good or bad value on the disability. It just says this is the disability, accept the disability. The problem isn't the disability, it's the environment. It's actually both the physical and the social environment. And in this model, the onus is actually on the mainstream culture to adapt, to provide the physical accessible infrastructure to what extent possible if you're dealing with physical disability. And most importantly, for the social attitudes, the culture to remain open and accepting of people with disabilities. So the best way for me to describe it, and the way I think about it, is imagine a world where disability was just normal, where you have people with wheelchairs everywhere. I'm going to talk about physical disability because that's what I understand the most. If everything was accessible, if, people were just aware that this was just a part of life, which it is, by the way. Disability is a part of life. I think it's the one factor, the one thing which is going to happen to all of us or affect all of us in some way, shape, or form. And that's much more conducive to a productive society where people with disabilities can contribute to their full potential.
So how have you encountered or challenged ableism?
Yeah, I think ableism is a tough one because many people don't even realize that they're being ableist. It's so deeply ingrained, I think, in our psyche, in our culture, in our society. Even those of us with disabilities like myself have their own kind of deep-rooted and ingrained ableism where we think in the back of our mind, we're not as good as everyone else. And, that's where these sentiments of, kind of pity and, condescension come from. So I think it's a challenge. And I think people need to be made aware of ableism, and it needs to be called out. So I have encountered ableism in many ways. in the professional environment, being both actively and passively excluded in social environments where people make assumptions that are rooted in, prejudices about people with disabilities, that where people think there's certain things I can't do, and or that I'm not entitled to. And I, for the longest time, didn't want to advocate for myself, as I've said earlier. And so I've, at some point, relatively recently, I would say I did a 360, going from not talking about this at all to doing what I'm doing now, talking about this visibly, openly, publicly, writing about this, advocating for both myself as well as people with MS and people with disabilities. And I've now made it a point to call out ableism when I see it. I do think, again, I'm going to emphasize this again, not everyone even knows that they are behaving in an ableist way. And so, unfortunately, as the case may be, it is up to us, people with disabilities, to try and educate others and ourselves. Because what I notice here is, most people are kind. Many people want to help me. They don't realize, they might go about in a clumsy way or not know how to do it. And so it is really up to the person with the disability to ask for help if they need it and to explain. In my case, I really do need help, and I appreciate it when people help me. Some people don't need it or don't want it in that way. So, but I feel like it's up to me to communicate what I need and when I need it. So
I think that's real important. And as you were talking about how there are people living with MS who don't realize their own ableist attitudes because they are so fundamentally ingrained in all of us. And I think maybe some of that comes from you're not born with MS. So somewhere along the way, you recognize that you have lost an ability you once had, right? And that loss registers as, so now I have less physical or cognitive or whatever the ability happens than I did before. And I think that sort of works against, you kind of have to overcome that mindset first, don't you?
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. And it's interesting that you bring this up, John, because when I talk, publicly about kind of disability inclusion, which is one of my favorite topics, inclusion, not accessibility, I do say that I wasn't always disabled. My disability happened over time. And so I have the, maybe not so unique perspective, but it's somewhat of a unique perspective of someone who was able and then progressively became disabled. I progressively, lost a certain one of my abilities. But it didn't change who I was, fundamentally. It changed my abilities to do certain things which I loved and which I wanted to do. And so I had to learn how to adapt to do those things, and also had to learn how to make other people adapt, make the society around me adapt. And I mean, I think you also said something else which I want to speak with, is having a disability doesn't mean that you're inferior. I mean, yes, you've lost something for sure. I have lost my ability, to walk independently. I've lost a lot of physical strength, but, quite honestly, I think I've gained a lot of mental strength. And it doesn't, that lack of ability to do something doesn't mean that I'm less entitled, frankly, to, having a good life, to having, a career, to having a family. And that's really important, I think, for people with disabilities to internalize, and for the mainstream culture to internalize. This doesn't mean that this group of people is less than anyone else.
Of course, I agree. And I think, the other thing that becomes challenging that someone who is disabled needs to overcome is self-definition, is coming to the point where they recognize that how fast they walk or run does not define who they are as a person. And being able to sort of separate that self-definition from what may be physical ability, physical manifestation that may be here now and may not be here later. Those are two different processes that you kind of have to go through internally, don't you?
Yeah. And sometimes you do have to, like many of us do, by the way, this is not specific to MS or disability. Sometimes you do need to take the time to reassess who you are. If you identify yourself as I'm going to make this up, as like an athletic person who doesn't need any help and who I don't know, travels around the world and has a really demanding career. And if you can't do that anymore because of your MS symptoms, well, and then maybe you need to reassess that identity. You're still the same person in the core and in the heart, but can you define yourself as something other than these constraints that society puts around you? I mean, this isn't different than people who leave or by choice or not by choice, like a high profile career, for example, and go into retirement or go into and people have to redefine and pull away their identity as being related to that job and to something personal. So that needs to happen as well. Is sometimes you need to redefine who you are as a person and rediscover who you are, if that makes sense.
It does. And as you point out, everyone ought to be doing that because we all evolve. I think back, I promise you, I'm not the same person I was when I was in college.
Yeah.
That guy was a lot of fun, but maybe this guy has learned a few things along the way, right? And so I think, as you point out, we are constantly evolving. Sometimes that evolution may include a change in physical or cognitive capabilities, whatever the case might be, but those are changes and we evolve with them. And it should be something that it's easier to talk about sometimes than to keep in mind as it's happening, but awfully important.
Yeah. And as you evolve, sometimes other things evolve around you. Maybe your friends will evolve. Maybe your friendships will evolve. Maybe you'll realize that not people around you are not as supportive as you thought they were. That's very telling, right? If someone is going to treat you differently because they feel realize you have a chronic condition or disability, it's probably better for you to know that, right? So.
And I can't think of anyone living with MS who I've met who hasn't experienced having to learn that along the way as well. Another aspect of societal disability, maybe.
Yeah. I mean, you'll meet people who are very uncomfortable with it.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those people will be uncomfortable, but will want to learn and want to support you. And you'll meet others who are so uncomfortable that they'll start excluding you. And well, I mean, as sad as that is, that does tell you something, right, about our society and about, what people, again, I don't want to blame anyone for this. I think some of this is deeply, deeply ingrained societal attitudes, and behaviors and, what we see in the media, for example. So.
Absolutely. Well, Jan Bonville, I could talk to you for hours. I want to thank you for
keep talking. Yeah.
I want to really thank you for all you do to raise awareness about MS and promote self-advocacy throughout the MS community. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
Absolutely, John. Thank you.
Here are two things we know to be true. Your brain is the command center for everything you do, and MS impacts your brain. So you can think of taking steps to protect your brain health as a proactive way of managing your MS. Prioritizing brain health gives you a sense of control and empowerment in your MS journey. It's not just about managing symptoms. It's about safeguarding your cognitive function and overall quality of life. My guest, nurse practitioner Erin Wilkinson, is joining me to share strategies you can use to preserve and even improve your brain health. MS can affect memory, attention, and processing speed, but proactive strategies can help preserve your cognitive function and your quality of life. Nurse practitioner Erin Wilkinson is joining me today to help us better understand the relationship between MS and brain health and to share some strategies for preserving and even improving your brain health. Erin is a nurse practitioner in the Multiple Sclerosis Department of the Cleveland Clinic Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health. She conducts her own research on brain health and MS, and Erin is currently pursuing her Doctor of Nursing Practice degree at the University of Alabama. Welcome to the podcast, Nurse Practitioner Wilkinson.
Thank you so much for having me today, John.
I always like starting these conversations by getting our definitions out of the way. So I hope you'll start us off by explaining what brain health is and why it's important for someone living with MS.
Yeah, so we know MS is a lifelong disease, and brain health becomes such an important factor in maintaining function. Brain health refers to the overall functioning and well-being of the brain. This can be seen in cognitive abilities like memory, concentration, and problem solving, emotional regulation, which is changes in mood, and physical brain structure, all which can impact the daily life for someone with MS. This concept of brain health and MS should emphasize preserving cognitive and neurological function. For someone with MS, brain health is especially important because, as we know, MS is a disease that directly affects the central nervous system, which includes the brain and spinal cord. With effective disease-modifying therapies, rehabilitation, and a healthy lifestyle, we can help individuals maintain overall brain health.
What do the terms brain atrophy and brain reserve mean in relation to MS?
Yeah, so starting with brain atrophy refers to the loss of brain tissue, which is basically the shrinkage of the brain. In MS, brain atrophy or shrinkage can start to occur during the first year after disease onset, and it becomes an accelerated process for those living with MS. As a provider, we look at brain atrophy as a reliable predictor of future and physical cognitive disability. And when there is whole brain atrophy, there is a correlation seen in cognitive dysfunction and mood disturbances. And with brain reserve, we also refer to this as neurological reserve. This is the brain's ability to withstand or cope with damage to continue functioning. I always think of this as like a buffer or the extra capacity the brain has to compensate for injury or disease. And everybody has a baseline brain reserve. It's unique to the individual and it's prior to MS disease onset. This reserve can be based on several factors. It could be through genetics, early life nutrition, medical history, environmental factors, intellectual background, and physical activity. Because brain reserve can vary from person to person, this is the reason individuals with a similar MS disease burden may have a wide variety of outcomes.
You know, I heard you mention the term neurological reserve just a moment ago. How is neurological reserve impacted by MS and by aging?
Yeah, so neurological reserve is the broad term, and it does include both brain reserve and cognitive reserve. So when we're looking at neurological reserve, we know this reserve is highest early on in MS. At this time, the brain can adjust to damage, which is essentially MS lesions, and is the reason MS can go undiagnosed early in the disease because of the brain's ability to cope with damage. Early on, there can be irreversible damage occurring, and the brain basically uses repair mechanisms to compensate for damage, and it ultimately masks the symptoms. The major concern arises when the reserve and repair mechanisms get used up, making compensation harder, and symptoms become more noticeable or permanent for individuals with MS. It really becomes important during this time, early on in the disease diagnosis, to initiate disease-modifying therapy. I like to refer to this as preserve the reserve. And with aging in MS, when it comes to age, a wild fact for all individuals with and without MS is the brain will naturally start to shrink or atrophy around the age 30 to 40, and it increases with each decade of life. It's important to know this because aging leads to the gradual loss of neurons and brain volume, even in healthy individuals. So when you're combining aging with MS, aging can accelerate the decline of neurological reserve. At times, older individuals with MS may experience faster progression of disability due to this double impact of age-related and disease-related brain changes. Protection of neurological reserve can be done through disease-modifying therapies, being physically and mentally active, a brain-healthy diet, avoidance of smoking and excess alcohol, and managing stress and getting adequate sleep. Are super important. And of course, regular monitoring and conversations with your healthcare team.
As you were just talking, I was picturing T-shirts with an illustration of a brain, and they say, preserve the reserve.
Yes.
I have one more term to ask you about. What is neuroplasticity, and why is it important for someone with MS?
Yeah, so neuroplasticity refers to the brain and spinal cord's remarkable capacity and ability to reorganize itself by forming and modifying new pathways and strengthening connections in response to damage. Neuroplasticity can occur in several ways. One is the process of the brain generating new neurons. These are the nerve cells responsible for transmitting information, basically called the messengers, and this process is referred to as neurogenesis. It can also occur through remyelination of the myelin, which is the protective sheath around the nerve fibers, and especially early in the disease. But remyelination can become less efficient with age and chronic inflammation, and over time it can be incomplete or it can fail. And lastly, through something called functional reorganization, also known as the architecture of the brain, where signals can bypass damaged areas, allowing the brain to start using different areas than it usually would. So overall, neuroplasticity is important for someone with MS as it is a key factor on how well the brain copes with damage and can support recovery after relapses. This can help someone maintain physical and cognitive function even when lesions are present. Neuroplasticity can also help with rehab. When someone goes to physical therapy or does brain exercises, they are training the brain to find a new way to do things, especially if MS has damaged the usual pathway. I also like to explain it this way. Think of it similarly to if a road is blocked. Your brain will build a detour to get you to where you need to go. Therapy helps your brain build and strengthen those detours. And the more you do it and use that route, the stronger it becomes. So basically, keep working on things to improve the neuroplasticity response. And it's important to remember that not all progress is linear. There can be setbacks, and there may be challenges in completing a task or the inability to do so, but really having the experience is what counts.
How do other health conditions or comorbidities like obesity, diabetes, or heart disease affect brain health?
Yeah, so comorbidities are any other health condition in addition to MS that someone may have. Comorbidities can be a concern in MS as they can negatively impact brain health and contribute to progression. Patients with one or more comorbidity can have more disability and trouble with walking, increased fatigue and pain, increased depression and anxiety, and a decreased quality of life. There's some research that shows individuals with one or more vascular comorbidity at the time of diagnosis had a worsening ambulatory or walking disability 6 years earlier than those without a vascular comorbidity. So it's important for individuals to work with their primary care provider to manage comorbidities like obesity, diabetes, heart disease, hypertension, high cholesterol, and lung disease, just to name a few, as this is one of the many ways to help reduce the risk of progression in MS by managing these comorbidities.
Let's talk about some lifestyle changes that someone can make that can actually improve brain health. For example, how does aerobic exercise preserve brain tissue and improve learning and memory?
Yeah, so being active improves cardiovascular fitness. And we just talked about those vascular risk factors for progression. And exercise is correlated with maintaining brain volume and cognitive reserve and reducing some of those vascular risk factors. Exercise increases the level of something called brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is a protein that supports the growth, survival, and repair of brain cells. This can help individuals improve processing speed. It helps blood flow to the brain. Exercise reduces brain atrophy and shrinkage. It stimulates those brain growth factors, helping to protect existing brain cells and encouraging the growth of new brain cells. It can strengthen connections between brain cells, which is important for learning. And it also supports neuroplasticity, which improves learning and memory.
Some people living with MS find that getting a good night's sleep can be challenging. Does the quality of our sleep have an impact on our brain health?
Yes, inadequate sleep or insomnia can affect brain health in many ways. It can impair memory, focus, and thinking because when we sleep, the brain processes and stores information. It can affect brain health by reducing the brain's ability to repair itself. And sleep helps support myelin repair, which, as we discussed, is crucial in MS. And besides cognitive challenges with inadequate sleep, it's closely linked to depression, anxiety, and irritability.
There isn't a specific MS diet, but is there a diet that can benefit brain health?
Yeah, so we always like to refer to the Mediterranean diet. It's a good option when trying to find a diet to follow for an anti-inflammatory diet. The Mediterranean diet includes a diet rich in fish, whole grains, leafy greens, olive oils, and nuts. And you could just kind of modify this diet to what you prefer or you like to eat that still kind of follows that Mediterranean diet plan. The goal should be to have 4 colorful foods per day. And nutrition really matters in MS and brain health as anti-inflammatory diets support immune function, they boost energy levels, they enhance brain and nerve function, reduces that inflammation, helps manage MS symptoms, and supports overall health and quality of life. There's so much information out there for recipes on the internet. I love using AI platforms myself. This helps mix things up with what you have in your fridge to always create a great variety to eat. I also recommend food and meal prepping as this can help maintain a food plan for someone. And if someone's on the go, it can help during the busy work week to pack appropriate diet.
Living with MS can be stressful. How does chronic stress impact brain health?
Yeah, so chronic stress can increase cortisol and can impact the brain structure and function and lead to cognitive decline, which affects memory, attention, and learning. Stress can also make it harder to concentrate, think clearly, and problem solve, making people feel brain fog or feeling easily distracted. Chronic stress also can interfere with neuroplasticity and it can lead to poor sleep. So, if stress is overwhelming for someone, it's important for individuals to discuss this with their provider to figure out the right treatment plan for them.
When we think about MS care, what is a brain health approach to MS care?
Yeah, so the brain health approach really is to preserve neurological reserve and maximize brain health for a person with MS. This can be done through several key pillars, starting with early diagnosis. The earlier we have a diagnosis for someone, the earlier we can provide effective treatment. Following that treat early, treat effective philosophy, this can help reduce disability and improve long-term outcomes. And through regular effective monitoring with MRIs remain the cornerstone for monitoring subclinical disease, brain atrophy, and suboptimal disease control, helping the provider and the patient find the right decision for therapy and treatment.
How might someone's brain health change throughout the course of their MS journey, from diagnosis to long-term living with MS?
Yeah, great question. And understanding the changes we discussed in brain health and aging can help individuals make informed decisions about their MS care to really protect their cognition, their function, and their quality of life over time. We talked about neuroplasticity and brain reserve being better early in the diagnosis, and that there's a natural occurring aging process of the brain, and the process can be accelerated for those with MS. As aging and MS occurs, there can be continual gradual brain tissue loss, with new symptoms showing up over time, even if relapses are less frequent. And also, the brain's ability to compensate can start to decline.
Unfortunately, we know that MS can be isolating. Does social interaction have a relationship to brain health?
Yes, being social and using your brain is so important. Not spending time with others can cause some cognitive setbacks. And I always let individuals know family and friends are usually understanding if it takes someone more time to get their words out or to think and process a question through. And it's just important to have these conversations with family, be a part of events and things to keep the brain going and to be socially active. Social interaction can help support brain health by reducing stress, keeping that mind active, and helping combat depression and enhancing intellectual stimulation. I always let individuals know they can branch out and meet like-minded people that maybe share hobbies, art, or crafting. They can attend MS support groups in their area or even volunteer a few hours somewhere to keep social interaction a key part of improving brain health. And I love to mention pets. If the circumstance for someone with MS is right, they can adopt a pet. Pets help reduce stress, anxiety, and depression, and they keep us moving.
Pets make everything better.
Yes.
If someone with MS is interested in focusing on or improving their brain health, which healthcare professionals should they be working with?
Yeah, so a team-based approach is always ideal for an individual with MS, really finding an MS specialist and then working with a team of physical therapists, occupational therapists, speech therapists. This can really help cognitive rehab and help restore ways to compensate for cognitive challenges. And if available, a referral to a neuropsychologist. They can conduct a detailed testing of memory, attention, and problem solving and check processing speed. And this testing can help guide cognitive rehab for someone. And another recommendation would be to address mental health with a mental health provider to help manage stress, depression, anxiety, or adjustment to just the diagnosis of MS. There are some sleep specialists that can help individuals get their sleep back on track. So that's an option as well. And then, of course, addressing and managing comorbidities with either the primary care provider or a specialist that manages those comorbidities.
Nurse practitioner Erin Wilkinson, thank you for all you do to improve the lives of people living with MS. And thanks so much for talking with me today.
Thank you so much for having me today, John.
That's going to wrap up this episode of Real Talk MS. Real Talk MS is powered by the National MS Society. And you can share this episode of the podcast by letting your friends or family members know that all they have to do is point their web browser at realtalkms.com/421. You'll find that link in today's show notes, so you can easily copy and paste it right into an email or a text. Next week, I'll be reporting from ECTRIMS, the largest MS research conference in the world. Over the next few days, there's going to be lots of news and lots of announcements made. And I'm excited to have Dr. Bruce Bebo, the Executive Vice President of Research at the National MS Society, join me to share the presentations and news that caught his eye. I hope you'll join me next week for Real Talk MS. I'm John Strum. Thanks for listening. Stay safe and make healthy choices.